Good day, everyone. My name is TANDIONO.
My name is Eileen Cynthia Mark.
Hello everyone, my name is Felicia Sword.
So first up is how much virtual memory is your system currently using compared to physical RAM. So for this one, we use 3 different laptops, 2 Windows and 1 MacBook. For the first one, virtual memory use is 18.3 GB observed under normal load and 39.7 GB observed under heavy load. So the comparison is 39.7 minus 32 GB, which is 7.7 GB or 124.1%. So this indicates that the system is actively relying on the page file for 7.7 GB of its committed memory to handle the heavy load.
How much virtual memory is my system currently using compared to physical RAM? So as you can see here, my system is currently using 11.8 gigabytes of virtual memory while only using 6.5 gigabytes of RAM. And you also notice that the virtual memory is a lot larger than the physical RAM. And the reason is because virtual memory uses both the physical RAM itself and disk storage to manage memory while running programs. And it only loads parts of the program into the actual RAM because programs uses a virtual address when it runs.
Next, for the MacBook, the system virtual memory usage is 11.32 GB, as you can see from the screenshots, which is 70.75% of the total physical RAM. So this indicates that the system is not actively relying on the swap file, as swap file shows 0 bytes. All processes are running entirely within the 16 GB of the physical RAM, leaving approximately 4.68 GB of available memory to handle additional workload.
Next is system page size. It is the smallest unit of data for memory management in an operating system that uses virtual memory. Page sizes is usually determined by processor architecture. And in order for us to check that, we first need to open Windows PowerShell and type in this command here, add here. Afterwards, you press enter and it'll show numbers here. In my case, it's 4096. So what this number is that it's your system's page size in bytes.
So for the other system, we also use the same command to test this out on Windows PowerShell and also give out the same result, as you can see in this screenshot, 4096 bytes. So 4096 bytes is the standard page size for all modern 64-bit Windows operating system on a x64 architecture. That's why we have the same result. What happened to system performance when physical memory is nearly full? So for this one, we tested this using 2 different versions of the laptop. This is the baseline or daily use and the heavy load. So for the first system, for the daily use, we open Task Manager, Chrome, and Spotify. Under heavy load, we open Task Manager, Chrome, Spotify, Steam, Dying Light, The Forest, and Deep Rock Galactic. So Dying Light, The Forest, and Deep Rock Galactic is a quite heavy game. So as you can see from the screenshots or from the table, the total RAM is 32 gigabytes. The physical memory use on normal daily use is 18 gigabytes and under heavy load is around 25.8 gigabytes. The commit limit is 33.6 gigabyte for normal daily use and 41.6 gigabyte under heavy load. So the system had to create 8 gigabyte of new virtual memory on the disk to avoid crashing. So for the second system, we also did the same experiment. So for baseline or daily use, we open Task Manager, Chrome, and WhatsApp. Under heavy load, we open Task Manager, Chrome, WhatsApp, Steam, Blender, Stalker, Call of Pripyat, Enhanced Edition, and Roblox. So you can also see from the screenshot or from the table, the total RAM is 8 gigabytes. Physical memory used for normal daily use is 5.4 gigabytes, and under heavy load is 7 gigabytes. The commit limit for normal daily use is 19.6 gigabyte, and also the same under heavy load. However, the system was forced to use 10.4 gigabytes of the slow page file just to stay running. So this extreme reliance on the disk will cause a noticeable lag. So what happened to system performance when physical memory is nearly full for standard laptop? So of course, the system will be put in under a lot of strain when the physical memory is almost full, and this will result the system having a slower response with a lot of tasks such as switching between applications. And the system will also experience high latency when trying to access data on the SSD or HDD, which will cause application to lag or briefly freeze, or it's called micro stuttering, as the OS was back data into the RAM.
So what happened to a system performance when the physical memory is nearly full? So first, you notice that your system begins to slow down, which is a lag due to the insufficient amount of space in the physical memory. Afterwards, your system will begin overheating because the programs now require to rely having to run on disk storage for memory, which will increase the workload for the CPU, which will then cause overheating.
So these are the consequences of what will happen when the system performance, when the physical memory is nearly full. So first, you will get the significant performance degradation or sluggishness. Accessing data from the disk, even a fast HSD, is 1,000 times slower than RAM. So when the system is forced to fetch data from this slow page file, it's called a hard page fault, and this is what causes the lags and freeze you feel as a user. Second, if the problem gets worse, you can hit a state called thrashing. This is the worst case scenario. So thrashing is when the operating system is so busy moving data between the slow disk and the full RAM that it doesn't have time to do any actual work. So this system comes to a crawl because it's spending all the CPU cycles just trying to manage the memory. And finally, you get unresponsiveness and potential crashes. So in extreme cases, the system can completely freeze. The OS may even trigger its out-of-memory killer, which starts force quitting your application to prevent the entire system from falling. Next is the 3 processes using the most virtual memory. So for this one, we just open Task Manager and sort descendingly on the commit size. So for the first system, the one that uses the most virtual memory is Chrome, Workload Session, Host.exe, and Spotify. For this one, it's tiworker.exe, msmpang.exe, and Steam.
So let's move on to part 5, and we'll start on subsection part A, which is threat classification. So the question is right here. There are a total of 4 scenarios. So let's start with the first question, which is to identify the malware type for scenarios 1, 3, and 4. So scenario 1 is considered a ransomware as it is identified that there is encryption and also demands payment, which is a good example of ransomware. Also, Trojan. Also, for scenario 3, we have Trojans because they are considered malicious code that disguises itself as legitimate software, masquerading to deceive users into granting access. While scenario 4 is an example of worms because they are self-replicating without user interaction and they move independently across networks. Question 2 is to classify scenarios 2 and 3 as passive or active attacks. Scenario 2 is when an attacker intercepts. Now, this is an important keyword because from there we could consider this eavesdropping, as eavesdropping is defined to be listening to network communications to obtain information without being noticed. So the attacker here observes only without modifying data, making it considered a passive attack. Scenario 3 is considered as masquerading because it is the act of pretending to be another entity to gain unauthorized access or privileges. So this is a kind of malware that actively modifies the system by installing additional software. So we can consider this an active attack. Question 3 is to identify which part of the CIA triad is violated for each scenario. For scenario 1, among the triad, there are 3 of them here in this scenario. The first is integrity. So in scenario 1, the files are modified or encrypted without authorization. This violates integrity. Files and systems become inaccessible until ransom is paid. So this is considered on the availability aspect. And also the potential of being violated if the attacker accesses file contents before encryption makes it violate the confidentiality aspect. And then we have scenario 2, where it violates the confidentiality aspect only as sensitive information, or in this case, login credentials especially, is being exposed to unauthorized access through eavesdropping. And then we have scenario 3, which is a Trojan. Now, confidentiality and integrity is violated here, where for confidentiality aspect, the keylogger captures sensitive information such as passwords and personal data without authorization, and system is being modified by installing unauthorized software. This violates the integrity aspect. Scenario 4, systems are being modified by malware infection without authorization, violating integrity. Corporate network functionality may be disrupted by infections, violating availability, and potentially violating the potentially violating the confidentiality aspect if the worm exfiltrates data or provides attacker access to the data. Moving on to part B, we'll examine how each OS implements protection against unauthorized file access, malware execution, as well as unauthorized admin actions. Let's begin with an overview. So unauthorized file access is prevented by file system permissions. Malware execution is blocked by antivirus technologies, and unauthorized admin actions are controlled by privilege escalation protections. Here are what's used in each operating system. Let's start with unauthorized file access. This occurs when attackers attempt to access files without permission. Both operating systems prevent this through file system permissions. Windows use NTFS permissions with access control lists that specify which users can access files and what actions they can perform, like read, write, or modify. Mac OS uses APFS permissions with Unix-style permissions and POSIX access control lists, featuring built-in encryption with AES-XTS. Both create the first line of defense against unauthorized data access. Malware execution is blocked by antivirus technologies in both systems. Windows Defender provides real-time protection using machine learning, behavioral analysis, and signature-based detection. It continuously scans files and automatically blocks threats. Mac OS X Protect uses Yara signatures that Apple updates automatically. It blocks known malware at app launch and moves threats to trash while alerting users. Both provide continuous automated protection against malware. Unauthorized admin actions are controlled by privilege escalation protections. Windows User Account Control, or UAC, requires explicit user authorization through consent prompts before allowing administrative actions. Apps run with standard permissions by default. Mac OS System Integrity Protection, or SIP, works at the kernel level to restrict critical system directories. So even if root users cannot modify protected files, and only Apple-signed processes can. This both prevent unauthorized system-level modifications. Now moving on to the Mac OS File Vault configuration. So first we go to Settings, and here's a screenshot of the Settings app. And then we move on to Privacy and Settings. And then we select File Vault here. This is when it's opted off. And then we enable File Vault if it's disabled. A pop-up here with two choices. You can choose to create a recovery key and not use an iCloud account. So this is what I selected. Then click Continue. And then here's the recovery key, which is generated. And we should remember this. And then encryption is finished if it shows this. Thank you.